Welcome to the world of synthesizers. As you can see, I'm surrounded here by 14 of the world's very finest synthesizers. In front of me, I have the Yamaha KX88, which is actually a controlling keyboard. It's not technically a synthesizer. The remaining synthesizers around me can really be grouped into one of three classes, and that is either digital, analog, or samplers. The analog synthesizer was invented and came first. After that was followed by the digital synthesizer, and the new high technology of recording allows the samplers to be possible. I'd like to demonstrate briefly and show you the differences between the three kinds. On my right, we have the Yamaha DX7, which is perhaps the most popular, widely sold synthesizer ever manufactured. It is a digital synthesizer. The digital synthesizers generally are more characterized by a cleaner sound than are the analog synthesizers. Consequently, they sound better for bell type of sounds and electric piano type of sounds than they do for, say, string sounds that the analogs are better suited for. A little sound. It's a very clean sound we have there, and that is characteristic of digital. Back behind that just a bit, we have another Yamaha digital synthesizer. Again, it's a very clean, digital type of sound. Down here, we have a Prophet VS, which is an analog synthesizer, and it's better suited for more string type of sounds. It's not quite so clean a sound, and that makes it perfect for string type of sounds and for general sounds that don't require the clarity of a digital synthesizer. Over on my left, we have some more digital synthesizers. We have a Yamaha DX7 also over here on the left, which, as you see, is characterized by that very clear, digital, clean sound. Down here, we have the Yamaha PF80, which is also digital and again has that very clean, digital, clear sound. Behind me, we have the TX802 of Yamaha. We have the two TX81Zs, and they are also all digital. At the bottom here, we have a sampler, which in this case is the sequential 2002, and a sampler simply records any sound that can be heard and then allows you to play it back anywhere over the keyboard. In this case, we've got it set up for a string sound, which is actually real strings, real violins that were recorded, and then when we play a note, you're actually hearing a recording of real string sounds. Again, summing up, basically there are three types of synthesizers: analog, digital, and samplers. The samplers technically are not synthesizers because they don't synthesize a sound from scratch. They record it. But for all practical purposes, those are the three kinds that every aspiring musician needs to have in his own home studio today. What you're seeing now are three smaller, more conveniently sized synthesizers that are just as capable in their own right as the larger ones are, but they're a little bit more affordable. The first one is capable of a number of sounds, as they all are. This is flute, got trumpets, clarinets. The second one over here also has a number of different sounds, very wide variety. They change sounds very easily, so that if you don't like one sound, there are many more available for you. And the same here, same principle. If you don't like a sound, just try to change it, and you'll be coming up with one that's much more suitable. In addition to have a nice variety of sounds, these synthesizers are also capable, unlike these others, of producing percussion, so that you can actually have rhythm going on at the same time. Let me demonstrate. If you wish to simply start some rhythm, push the button, and you have a drum beat going along. It has a number of different rhythms, so if one is not appropriate for what you need, just try a different one. It has everything from country to waltzes to rock and roll to slow rock to big bands, basically everything you really could possibly use. In addition to that, if you actually wish it to play chords for you, hit a note in the bass and it's playing automatically like a robot. If you want to change chords, just hit a different note and instantly the thing follows you, just like it's writing its own song. If you wish to also play along with it, it's capable of actually doing both things at one time. You can let this one keep playing, go over to another synthesizer, and of course we can go over to the second one. Change sounds, of course, while we're playing. So they're very capable machines, capable of playing rhythms, melody lines, and harmonies all at the same time. And now we're going back to our controller keyboard, the Yamaha KX88. It's called a controller keyboard because it does control all the other synthesizers that we can have connected to this. Most synthesizers are manufactured these days so that they can be connected to a controller keyboard via a MIDI port that I'll explain a little bit later on. In this particular setup, I have almost all of them, not quite, but most of these synthesizers hooked up. What it allows me to do is to play each of the synthesizers from this synthesizer keyboard without actually touching the other synthesizers. For instance, when I play this, you're actually hearing every synthesizer almost that we have here, even though I'm only playing on one keyboard. That's why it's called a controller keyboard. To demonstrate, I'm just going to play a few bars here, and every sound you hear is being triggered by the master controller keyboard. During my solo performance earlier, you undoubtedly heard not only all the synthesizers, but also the drums that were playing along with it. Well, I'd like to take the opportunity now to introduce you to my drummer. Meet Mr. Drums. There are many different drum machines made. This happens to be a Yamaha drum machine. And drum machines are simply capable of getting every drum sound that a real live drummer would actually get from his own drum set. You have bass drums, you got snare drums, you got your rim shots, you have tom-toms, you got your crash cymbals, claps, hand claps, you have your tambourines, cowbells, even shakers. You have every single drum sound that you can possibly need for your performance into one box. This allows a one-man studio to create all the sounds that heretofore took 6 men to create. Your drum machine and most other synthesizers are connected via MIDI cable. And I'd like to explain now a little bit about the concept of MIDI. M-I-D-I. This is short for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And this is a MIDI cable. I'd just like to show you. Basically, it's a 5-pin MIDI cable. The purpose of this is to simply allow you to connect your synthesizers directly to your controller keyboard, as we have done here. If you have a computer in your setup, you can connect your synthesizers to them. But as I say, for this performance today, I really wanted to connect everything to our controller keyboard, so we're not using a computer. The idea is to simply connect all of your synthesizers via the Musical Instrument Digital Interface to your electronic controller keyboard, and then by simply transmitting currents through the MIDI cable, you're performing and playing all of your different synthesizers. Going back to our drum machine, we have Mr. Yamaha RX-5 over here. I'd like to demonstrate a little bit about drum beats, how to create pop drum beats, how to create rock drum beats. Basically, it's fairly simple. All you got to remember is there's three basic elements to a good pop beat. That is bass drum, snare, and hi-hat. With those three elements, you can really create just about any feel you wish. The bass drum, of course, is your low drum. Usually comes on the downbeat. The snare drum usually comes on the upbeat, so it sounds something like. The third one, the hi-hat, your cymbal, usually plays along with the two. So if you're going something like. Basically, you put those three elements together, combine them with different rhythms, and you can come out with just about any drum beat that's on the radio and popular today. I've got several already put into Mr. Drummer here, and I'd like to show you a few of them, starting with the most simple and progressing on to a little bit more complicated. And I'll play along with some of them and give you an idea how to work with them. Basically, starting with a very, very simple one. You've got your bass on the downbeat, you've got your snare on the upbeat, and you've got your hi-hat in there playing quarter notes very occasionally. Now with this type of beat, if you were actually recording in your studio with it, you probably want to add a bass guitar line to it. After you lay down your bass line along with this, you probably want to maybe put strings into it. Naturally, you've already recorded your bass, so what you're doing here is you're layering. You're starting from your ground up. You're putting your bass down, you put your strings down, then you can put other instruments down, such as a clavinet sound. And you put all those together, and by the time you layer 5 or 6 instruments along with your Mr. Drummer, you actually come out with a very complete sounding rhythm track. Now, this is a very simple beat here that we've got going now. I'd like to increase this just a hair in complexity. Okay, we've added just a few more hits there on the snare. And by doing so, we've increased the interest a little bit because we have more going on now. But the same principle applies. You can go over and you can layer your bass, add all your other instruments on top of it, and let's just play along just a few bars here and give you an idea of basically what we can do with a beat like this. This is still a fairly elementary drum beat that we're working with here. So let's increase its complexity just a hair. Now, what we've done here is bring out the hi-hat cymbal a little bit more, and as you hear it now, it's playing the equivalent of eighth notes. The drums are playing a little bit more, there's a little bit more rhythmic interest, but again, the same principle applies. We're layering from the ground up, from the bass up, so that you can go over, add your bass, add your clavinet around that, and I'll play a few bars here and give you an idea of basically what kind of rhythm and things you can add on top of that type of sound, that type of drum beat. let's continue exploring the drum machine by going up a little bit more in complexity. As you see, these patterns are already programmed into the drum machine, so it's very, very easy to change between them. This is very similar to the last one. Same thing applies. Add your bass, layer on as you go. This is so similar to the other one, I really would like to go ahead and jump up in order of complexity just a hair. Okay, we're getting livelier yet. As you see, you can start with a very simple pattern, and just by making a few changes with either the bass drum or the hi-hat or even the snare, you can come out with a totally different feel. With this one, I'd like to give you a little play along here and demonstrate to you what can be done again. I wish I had more than two hands so that I could show you how we could play the bass along with them. Again, if you have a tape recorder, a multi-track tape recorder, a 4-track perhaps, or even better, an 8-track or more, you can always lay down your bass, come back to it, and so that you don't have to worry about playing everything at the same time. We don't have a recorder here today, so I'm just going to go ahead and play you a little ad-lib selection along with this drum beat. Another thing our drum machine can do is to allow you to overdub more interesting patterns on top of it for fills, lead-ins, transition parts between sections. The way you can do that is by starting a given pattern and then adding toms, snares, different things on top of it, such as or maybe a different snare part. Now, while that's happening, we have access to many, many, many different sounds here. You can have a whole world of percussion instruments at your fingertips. Everything from castanets to timbales, frankly, even gunshots, everything you can think of can be put on the computer chips and used. You can also overdub much more complex parts if you choose to, just by same technique. Now, I've tried to give you some idea of how to combine three elements, the bass drum, the snare, and the hi-hat, and come out with a multitude of variations of pop drum beats and rhythms. And again, it's very easy to add on to those. Once you get your drum beat going, add your bass line, add another keyboard part, maybe add some strings on the top of it. Just use your own imagination, add bells, whatever you feel like. After you get 6 or more tracks, plus your rhythm beat, you've come out with a Pop 40 song. Moving to our more advanced synthesizers, there are several ways to get a lot of different sounds out of these instruments. That's one of the beautiful parts about them. They afford you a large variety of sounds at your fingertips. The digital synthesizer, such as the Yamaha DX7 Model 2, is a rather difficult, relatively speaking, synthesizer to program. So for that reason, it's best to have a lot of pre-programmed voices available at your disposal. Each of these 2 rows of buttons represents a sound available to you. By hitting one, we have this sound. If we hit another button, we have a little bit more sound like that. Hitting a third button, we have yet a different. And basically we can go through we have up to 32 sounds available to us. Now if we need more, there's a couple ways they're available to us. And that is, we can have a diskette, a little computer storage discs over here on the side, such as these. This diskette holds a number of sounds. By placing it in here, one can load many, many sounds directly off the diskette, directly into the synthesizer, and then again have them right at your disposal for playing. Just hitting a button gives you a lot of different sounds. The programming of the instrument is a little bit more difficult unless you're a serious student of synthesizers. I would suggest that you simply get a large library of pre-existing sounds and use those. Moving down to an analog synthesizer, such as the Prophet VS, we have, again, pre-existing sounds available to us. We have strings, we have really a number of different sounds available to us. Now, the analog synthesizers are much easier to program than the digital instruments are, and you should not be afraid of them. Basically, you can go in, set up a sound, such as, say, our string sound, go up to your filter, simply go down to your data entry button, and you can hear the sound change as I move the fader up and down. I'm not changing the note, I'm just changing the fader. That changes the sound in one way. If you want another sound, go up to the filter, hit the resonance button, again, hold down a note, and by moving the data entry key, this again subtly changes the sound. You can go over to the envelope amount, again, hold your note, and by moving your data entry slider, you can change your sounds available to you. On the Prophet VS, it also has what we call a joystick. And that is, by using the joystick, we can actually change the waveform mix just by moving this around. The third type of synthesizer that we've spoken of tonight is the Prophet 2002, which is simply a digital recorder. And the sounds are loaded into this from a diskette placed into the slot here. This has 12 different sounds, actual sounds recorded, not synthesized to be exact. Put the diskette in here, push load, go over to execute. Now the machine will actually read the different sounds off of the diskette. It'll take about 20 or 30 seconds to load them in here. As it's going, you can see all the lights indicating that the load procedure is taking place effectively. When this finishes, the different sounds will be loaded into the machine and at our disposal. If you do not wish to use a disc, you can plug a microphone into your little sample input here and simply play any sound that can be imagined, any sound that can be heard can be recorded into the input by means of a microphone. You can record a dog barking, you can record a glass breaking, you can record a piano, you can record an orchestra. Anything you want to can be recorded into the sampler here. Then when you record it, you can reproduce that sound simply by playing on the keyboard that is connected via MIDI to the sampler, such as that way you're hearing the actual string sound of the Prophet digitally recorded on disc and played back by the sampler. In this way, you can get literally hundreds of sounds at your disposal for your sampler. You can get hundreds of sounds at your disposal by the Prophet VS by simply tweaking the sounds a bit, or getting a myriad of sounds available for your Yamaha DX and the other FM synthesizers, digital synthesizers, simply by using the ROM cartridge or the diskette. Putting together your own synthesizer studio is not that difficult, nor expensive. What we have here is a large, sophisticated array of synthesizers and samplers that is quite expensive, but you can start your own studio very inexpensively. I suggest a good way to begin is by getting a couple of small synthesizers, such as similar to the ones we have here, the small keyboards, and actually adding a small, inexpensive drum machine to them until you become familiar with your equipment. Then, and you can do that for just a couple $100s, after you become familiar with them, then you can move ahead and actually add various additional synthesizers to increase your sound capability. Specifically, you'll eventually want to have an analog synthesizer, a digital synthesizer, and a sampler, because each one provides its own different sound, distinctly different, so that you don't get bored with the same sound over and over again. If you have all three, you have a nice variety of sound. Just like an artist paints with colors, you're painting an aural palette of sound. with your synthesizers. Now, as you become familiar with your small setup, you'll want to increase them, and eventually you'll want to add a computer to control your synthesizers. Technology, the musical instrument digital interface, remember, is ideal for this. It allows every note that you play on your keyboard to be programmed directly into your computer, so that after you finish playing it into your computer will play back every one of your synthesizers, whether it's one synthesizer or 25 or 100. It'll play them all back automatically. It also allows you to edit any mistakes you make just by going directly to a note, changing it very painlessly and very efficiently. I would suggest that you do start out with a small computer, and as you gain proficiency on it, go into the more powerful lines. And that really is the way the music of today is made, that you hear every day on the radio, using synthesizers and most of the time computers controlling them. Now I'd like to simply demonstrate a performance of what can be done using synthesizers and the new MIDI technology.